Okay. So do you want to start off by introducing yourself?
Do I want to what?
Start off by introducing yourself.
So sure. My name's Ruth Ann, and I am a psychologist, and I mostly work with people experiencing some kind of challenge in their relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I also work with people who have pathological narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
I work with their usually their partners, sometimes also their adult children, very occasionally also their parents.
Oh,
So
really? Okay, that's brilliant.
yeah.
Okay, so if you don't mind me asking you, like, what made you want to sort of specialize more with relationships and narcissism specifically?
Well, first off, I enjoy it, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I enjoy working with relationship stuff. That's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
It's what I've always liked.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked in mental health services for many years. So people had to be mentally ill uh, to see me. They had to have depression or anxiety or psychosis or a
Mm-hmm.
diagnosed personality disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I've had my own challenges in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I've addressed them myself, and I just think there's a lot of people suffering because of challenges in relationships, and there's also a lot of potential for our relationships to make our lives so much better.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I so have you only if you come comfortable us answering this. Have you been in like a narcissistic relationship yourself, or
um
uh,
I wouldn't put those kinds of labels on it.
okay.
I had a very long-term relationship with someone who it ended up being a relationship where I wasn't happy, he wasn't happy.
Mm-hmm.
It ended very suddenly.
Oh no.
Um, and, you know, what people said, oh, maybe he was a narcissist, maybe he was avoidant, he was da 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 da. And I could sit through my diagnostic manuals and go, I something. Um, but actually, I don't think that would have been helpful for me.
Mm-hmm.
And nor do I think that it's helpful to think of myself as
Mm-hmm.
the innocent party.
Uh-huh. Makes sense.
That's the other thing. And I'm also not saying that, um, it's really tricky because I have to be really careful what I say. Because, if someone is abusive to you,
Mm-hmm.
physically abusive, emotionally abusive,
Mm-hmm.
that's on them. I'm not saying you're not the innocent party.
Right.
But if you really want scope for changes in your relationships, if you really want to grow, I think it's really helpful to ask yourself, what drew me into this relationship?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Stay for as long as I stayed. Why did I become so passive? Why did I become so placating? Why did I become so argumentative? Why did to really ask yourself those kind of questions, I think is much more freeing. And
It
it's
is.
asking those questions without blame,
Mm-hmm.
without shaming yourself, without thinking it's all my fault, without letting the other person off the hook for the
Mm-hmm.
things they are responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a much more liberating place to be, rather than they're the narcissist, I'm the innocent victim. And that just creates so much fear. Like if I go, oh, I'm going to find another narcissist. Narcissists are everywhere. No.
I have two things to say about that. Oh my God, I cannot agree more. Like, do you, I feel like that's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. I think it's so much easier to just call someone out and, say they're a narcissist instead of like taking that sort of accountability and looking into yourself as to why you stayed in something that was so toxic or, tolerating bad
Mhm.
behavior. Um, uh, okay, can you talk about that aspect though? Because I see this a lot on social media where people are consistently calling your exes narcissists. And I'm sure maybe they are. That's not I'm not
Maybe they are.
I you never know, but I feel like that doesn't help beyond a certain point.
No,
Um it
it
so
does.
I think maybe Do you think it does help though to a certain extent? Like has that something?
I think let me cycle back because I want to say something else about asking why you didn't leave.
Hmm.
Because not everyone has the option to leave.
Right.
Okay, so I want to be really clear.
Hmm.
Sometimes you don't have the option.
Hmm.
You know, circumstances are such, culture is such, the community that you're in is such, and sometimes you're weighing up the risks of
Hmm.
leaving,
Hmm.
maybe physical risks of leaving, the risk to your children of leaving, and what
Hmm.
that does to you. So I'm not. It's not a simple thing. I don't think it's helpful to think of everything as some kind of psychological issue because it isn't.
Hmm. Hmm.
But then to ask your question about is it helpful to call someone a narcissist or to put a label like that on them? I think there's a stage where some people have been so self-blaming
Hmm.
and they've taken on so much responsibility for the relationship, for their partner's behavior, for
Hmm.
the ways that their partner actually treats them very poorly.
Hmm.
And often that is a symptom of being in a relationship with someone who's highly narcissistic,
Hmm.
who plays the victim because pathological narcissism is associated with a victim mentality. They see
Hmm.
themselves as, I'm a helpless victim,
Hmm.
and how could you do this to me?
Hmm.
So that difficulty taking accountability is actually part and parcel of pathological narcissism. So I think for some people there is a point at which recognizing their ex was a quote unquote narcissist is often about recognizing sometimes they were the bad guy.
Okay.
Sometimes it was their behavior that caused the harm in the relationship, and it
Hmm.
had nothing to do with me. And I think that is kind of a way of getting away from self blame.
Hmm.
It can be helpful to a point.
Hmm.
But if that's the only place you stay, it's a very fearful place to stay because then you're like, there's nothing I can do. There's narcissists and psychopaths and evil people all around the world,
Hmm.
lurking around every corner,
Hmm.
just ready to get in a relationship with me. And what you don't really process in that place is what's the impact that these experiences have had on me? How has
Right.
it colored my view of the world? How has it colored my view of myself? How has it colored the way I approach other relationships? How does it color the way I interact with my friends, my family, new romantic partners? It's usually romantic partners here we're talking about, right?
Hmm.
I don't think it helps you look at those things. And it's kind of lacking in a way. So it's helpful to a point, but not the whole way.
Okay. That's brilliantly
Yeah.
said. Thank you.
And,
So,
and, and sometimes I think it's also helpful
uh-huh.
at that point at which someone needs to, I say it's helpful, it can also be a double-edged sword. The point at which you really need to leave, there's a decision. No, they really are a narcissist. I'm cutting through all of that kind of ambivalence I have and that dissonance I have about whether I should
Hmm.
stay or leave this relationship. I'm
Hmm.
going to be more black and white because that can
Hmm.
make me more decisive,
Right. Right.
right? But
Hmm.
it doesn't always work because
Hmm.
guess what? At some point, you start to see that person's nicer side, their kinder
Hmm.
side. They apologize. You see the things that you liked in them. You see
Hmm.
the things you draw on them, and you're like, oh, well, maybe it's not so black and white. Maybe I'm being a terrible person to call them a narcissist. Maybe
Hmm.
I'm being really lacking in understanding and compassion. So actually, I think in the long term, it fuels the ambivalence because you just are back and forth.
I I
Just what
I
I
get
mean.
1,000%, 1,000%. Um, I think probably ask you a very um I wouldn't say controversial as such, but like I'm being frank. Do you believe people that are narcissistic can change to a
Okay.
big extent?
Wow. Okay. This is a big loaded question. What people seem to mean when they ask this question
Hmm.
is, do you think my abusive partner who
Hmm.
is treating me badly can
Uh-huh.
change, and therefore I should stay with him or
Hmm.
her
Hmm.
until they do?
Hmm.
No. Okay. So this is a problem. And then the other thing is like, who's asking the question? Because if you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, I have this partner who's very abusive,
Right.
who's really cruel, who's emotionally manipulative, who
Uh-huh.
blames me for everything, who gaslights, who does all of these things that cause so much hurt and pain to me, can
Mm-hmm.
they change? Well, the wrong person is asking the question.
Right.
Will they change? Is this a good dynamic for you to be in? Is this a good relationship for you? Is
Mm-hmm.
this doing you a great deal of harm and causing a great deal of suffering?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the more important questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if someone comes to me, and it does happen, I promise it happens, and they say, I think I am a bit of a narcissist. That
Mm-hmm.
does happen. I recognize that I am sometimes very controlling of my partner.
Mm-hmm.
I recognize that I blame my partner for things.
Mm-hmm.
I realize I can actually be a real asshole on occasion.
Mm-hmm.
Can I change? Then the answer is yes.
Ah, but that's a great
Right.
deal of self-awareness, though.
Yeah. Well, yes, because there's self-awareness there and there's also some motivation there. So I would say I would be quite hopeful that that person could change. And the research literature in this is really difficult to make sense of. So people go, oh, there's no research showing narcissists can change. Well, there's research that shows that levels of narcissism generally decline over time with
Mm-hmm.
age. That's not to say that everyone is going to get better with age, because I think we can all think of examples where people
Who
have
get
not.
worse? Yeah.
They've got worse, right?
Yeah.
That happens. But I always go back to when I started my career, when I
Mhm.
started working with patients in the
Mhm.
90s, people said, the worst possible patients are borderline patients. People
Mm.
with borderline personality disorder can never ever change.
Uh-huh.
And people would even say, oh, I think your partner's borderline. You
Mhm.
should leave her. It was usually her in those days.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I've seen a
Crazy.
lot of men with BPD too
Yeah, there are men with BPD, but it's much more commonly diagnosed
in
in women.
women. Oh, okay.
And now we have several really good treatments for borderline personality disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the field has become much more hopeful. Like
Mm-hmm.
we can do things that are helpful to people that can help them manage their emotions, that can help them improve their relationships. The whole landscape has changed in 20, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect, I hope that in 20, 30 years from now, things change when it comes to NPD2, that we have
Oh.
much research into how to help people with NPD. But NPD and BPD, so borderline personality and narcissistic personality disorder,
Mm-hmm.
are kind of siblings.
Ah.
The level of comorbidity, the
Uh-huh.
number of people who have one who also have the other, the overlap is high.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't stand to reason to say, well, this one can change and this one can't, you
Hmm.
know. And I think in my own practice, I've certainly seen people change significantly,
Oh, that's
become
wonderful.
much kinder to themselves,
Mm-hmm.
much kinder in their relationships. And when I work with someone who's really on that narcissistic end of the spectrum,
Mm.
um, I want to see their partners. I want them to bring their partner into therapy with them, and I want their partner to give me the dirt.
Ah.
I know what they're really like behind closed doors, because I don't want them coming into therapy and being able to paint good pictures and go, look, I'm really changing. I want that kind of honesty. And
Right.
if someone has the courage to do that, then I'm pretty hopeful about the capacity for change. Um, and I also think in saying that, that is not me saying everyone can change and everyone will change, and you should be soft and compassionate and kind and stay with someone who's treating you badly.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's more common in my work for me to help someone leave.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay.
I have helped far more people leave than to stay.
I think
But
I think that's
but
the
that's
best
but
approach.
that's not the same as saying someone can never change.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes in helping someone leave, I'm also helping them to have a much more constructive relationship with their ex.
Mhm.
Because there's often children. They often still need to co-parent.
Correct.
You can't go no contact.
You're right. Some people don't have the liberty, the freedom to do something like that. So, um, yeah, okay, I wanna talk about you speaking about PPT and NPT having that comorbidity.
Mhm.
Um, I myself was about to ask you that I've seen most people. I would say I think I only know one one person who does not also have NPD along with BPD. So each other because they say people with BPD are supposed to be high on the empathy thing, and people with NPD usually don't have empathy. That's considering if people with every narcissist does not have empathy, which might or might not be true.
Yeah, that's
Um,
not. The levels of empathy vary.
mhm,
Um, and I think people, people with BPD, we
mhm,
know from the research, is they're really, really good at picking up people's negative emotions.
mhm.
They're very good at noticing those little tiny changes. They're almost too good, right? Um, so they know before you know what you're feeling.
That's insane.
It's I can tell you a really funny story. It was another therapist,
Uh-huh.
someone I really, really respect, and she was very senior. And
Hmm.
she'd been, she went and had a session with a patient, and the patient said, "You're angry." And she said, "I'm not
Hmm.
angry." And the patient said, "You're really angry. You're angry with me." And she said, "I'm not angry with you." And the whole session went like this. And then later that afternoon, she's in the staff room. She's banging around.
Oh my God.
And another colleague
Hmm.
said, "You're really pissed off
Hmm.
today. Oh, what's going on?" And she started a whole rant about some administrative departmental issues, work-based issues. And she really had a big rant. And she said, it feels good to get that off my chest. I've been really angry all day." And then she realized
Oh
her patient was
God.
angry.
Oh my God. How did they notice that? Okay.
She did tell the patient. She fessed
That
up.
is insane. Oh God.
Yeah. So people with
Oh my God. Okay.
I think it comes from the way I understand it is I think if someone is BPD, they probably have had a lot of abuse from care.
Hmm.
People close to them have been unreliable and unpredictable, and they're hyper vigilant. So they're
Hmm.
looking, scanning all the time because
Hmm.
changes in emotion is a sign of threat.
Hmm.
I suspect that's what's
Hmm.
probably happening. Um, and I think people with borderline tend to be much higher in emotions and affect. They're much more,
Hmm.
they veer towards excessive emotion, right? So the emotions are
Hmm.
felt more intensely. There's a really high level of
Hmm.
reactivity. Whereas I think people on the sort of
Hmm.
narcissistic end of the spectrum are much better at switching off. There's an under reactivity, an under responsiveness, and almost a lack of attention to
Hmm.
pay to other
Hmm.
people's emotions. In a way that kind of flip sides of the same issue. So one is like,
Okay.
I don't want to tune into other people's emotions,
Hmm.
bother with those things. I'm going to switch off. I'm going to
Hmm.
be a big guy. I'm going to be in control. They're often very controlling because you have the over
Uh-huh.
controlling issue. So,
Right.
which can be quite manipulative and coercive.
Hmm.
And then with the more borderline presentations, what you get is the much more emotional reactivity,
Hmm.
volatility.
Okay, that makes
I don't know
sense.
if that makes sense. I didn't think
That-
about this before we talked, so I haven't prepared.
okay, no, no, I'm super
Mhm.
spontaneous with these things actually. Wait, so
Yeah.
that can be pretty confusing for the partner because a friend of mine actually had PPT and NPD both, and sometimes it was very difficult to keep up because, of course, I can't sit and label every single reaction and say, okay, this is NPD and this is BPD, but um, be really reactive to completely non-reactive was pretty, the switch was so sudden, like sometimes it was very difficult to keep up. Like, wait, which one is you?
Yeah. So you see the same thing you see the two different things in one person.
Oh, just to say, I think my network is.
Yeah, just give it a moment. I'm sure it'll catch up.
Is it better? I think I can.
Yeah, I
Is
think we're
that?
good.
Yeah, I think so. All
So
right. Okay. Okay. So, okay. So, again, this is not me in any way like saying that people should stay in abusive relationships. And let's say, a partner is a narcissistic person is a bit self-aware and they're somewhat willing to work on themselves. How would you recommend someone like in that sort of state? How would you recommend their partner to, work through things? Because that's a pretty difficult thing to stick through with, know.
yeah.
You know.
Well, these things they happen in they're relational issues. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't kind of have like this narcissism thing that's sort of sits over here and
Mm-hmm.
to take responsibility to heal it. They won't. It's gonna play out in their relationship. So I would say understand your response to their behaviors, to the things that are causing harm.
Mm-hmm.
Have a look and see what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Often it's being over placating and pleasing, being a
Okay.
little quiet, not asserting
Mm-hmm.
yourself. You can learn not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also say, where possible, to try and see if you can do that to some extent with your partner. So, and it probably is going to require very skilled couples therapists, to be honest,
Could you
because
explain that more?
well, if I'm working with, okay, I'll make up a story. I never just, by the way, I never discuss anyone who I work with on social
Okay, just
media.
hypothetical, yeah.
So this is, but what I will do is I will make up a story
Mm-hmm.
that
That's
kind
easy
of
to understand. That's so much more.
just so we're clear. So let's imagine you have someone like the person who says, I'm over controlling, I'm
Mm-hmm.
bad tempered, I blame
Mm-hmm.
my partner for everything. Well,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm interested what your partner do.
Mm-hmm.
The Does your partner take the blame? Do they
Mm-hmm.
back? Does it
Mm-hmm.
get into a super high conflict situation where it's like, no, you're to blame, and they actually end up shaming you, and then
Mm-hmm.
you get defensive and angry, and the two of you are escalating each other?
Mm-hmm.
Or does your partner say, oh, of course, okay, fine, I'm going to placate you, I'm going to be quiet, I'm going to withdraw, I'm going to let you kind of have your thing. And then you kind of feel a bit more in control, but then you're also annoyed at your partner because they're more distant and you kind of know that they've compromised. Um, and so I want to understand that dynamic, and I want the couple to understand that dynamic, and I want them to think, do we want to change this as a couple?
Mm-hmm.
Because,
Right.
and it's not about the partner taking responsibility for the other partner.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
It's especially not about the partner who's being controlled or hurt taking responsibility for the one who's doing the controlling or the hurtful behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I think it is about taking a step back and being able to see that pattern play out, and then also being able to recognize what's going on when you're in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it can also be finding a way, for the narcissistic partner to be the one who gives permission to the other partner to say, I kind of feel a bit controlled.
Right. Right. That's quite
And I
different.
think we're doing that thing where you get really controlling and then I try to please you. And I think we both know that you don't really want to do that.
Wow, but that would take like a lot of self-awareness plus will to act on both sides. I think that's pretty difficult to execute. I mean,
It
sure,
is. Yeah,
works out, it's pretty.
it is difficult. I wouldn't have a job if this was easy. It's not. It's not easy. It is really, really difficult. And but then I'd also be saying to the more narcissistic person, what are you gonna do too? Because you have a responsibility that when you notice that your partner is getting very placating of you, is going quiet, to
Mhm.
go, am I being an asshole here?
Right.
You know,
Uh-huh.
can you find in yourself that much more grown-up version of you that says, hey, don't treat people like this?
Hmm.
Because when you treat people like this, it doesn't go to good places. Yeah, in the
Right.
short term, you get your way. In the long term, people don't like you, they don't love you, and they don't really respect you.
Hmm.
So let's not go there. We can do better than this.
Correct.
So it's, but you asked what would I say to the partner? So I would say get more aware of yourself and your own
Uh-huh.
reactions.
Right.
And if scope to work with the other partner to find ways to address this in your relationship, that's going to be really, really beneficial.
Hmm.
And even if not, even if you try and you make some changes and you learn how to maybe be a bit more sturdy in yourself.
Right.
So you learn actually, I'm not going to bend over backwards for this person. I'm not going to compromise on everything. I'm not going to give them their way just to please them.
Hmm.
And you actually get much more confident at being calm, being sturdy, also like not losing your temper with them, not joining them in the argument where it's you versus
Yep.
them in a power struggle, because that doesn't go anywhere good. So
Hmm.
it's figuring out a way to do things differently for you.
Hmm.
The response to that is going to tell you everything you need to know
Right.
about the future of the relationship. Because, if someone gets really critical and nasty towards you,
Hmm.
and you respond in kind and you get critical and nasty towards them, and the
Oh God,
whole
that
thing,
does not end well.
right, doesn't end well. And then at the end, you're like, oh, I really wish I hadn't said that. I was actually quite nasty.
Hmm.
I don't feel good about myself. You end up actually not really knowing what to make of that whole situation,
Hmm.
unless you're going to call it reactive abuse, which
I think I
is
wouldn't
another
really agree with that terminology at all.
challenging issue to deal with.
Yeah.
But I think if you're able to take a little responsibility on yourself for how you react,
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
will make a situation where the writing is on the wall.
Okay.
So you get to see, well, can they respond in kind? Will they respond well to that? Will they
Hmm.
take your invitation to a better relationship?
Hmm.
Where you're like, let's not do this to each other. I don't like it, neither do you. Will they be
Hmm.
like, yeah, okay. You know what? Yeah, I don't want to do this again.
Hmm.
I don't know how to stop, but I don't want to do it because that's creating space for a new pattern to emerge. Or
Change.
do they double down? What do you do? Oh, now what, you've been in therapy and now you think of all our conflict? Ugh. Ugh. Yeah. Well, if they do that, that kind of tells you something. That's
Okay.
very useful information.
Oh God, I'm sure that happens a lot. Oh God.
Both happen. I've seen both happen.
Okay. So, well, okay. So you spoke about self-responsibility and that aspect. So, um, okay, let's say, a person who exited a narcissistic relationship wants to sort of figure out what happened to them, just to understand and make sense of it. But then what happens is when you start getting into that whole cycle of studying about what narcissism is, you get wound up in that ruminating sort of a cycle where it just doesn't stop because I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. It
It does.
does. And I often joke, I joke with some of the people I see. I'll
Uh-huh.
say, how many videos did you watch about narcissism this week? By the end of therapy, I'm hoping it's going to be a lot less. That's my measurement now. That's my
Oh God.
outcome measure. But I think you're right, because I think what you're touching on is getting sucked into understanding their relationship
Hmm.
through that lens of they're a narcissist.
Correct.
And it's just, it doesn't actually give you any real answers.
Uh-huh.
It's just, it's never ending.
Hmm.
So you kind of going down the line of they were bad, they were bad. I'm a victim, I'm a victim. I've been hurt, I've been hurt. That's not the scope for building a healthier relationship with
Hmm.
anyone, least of
Hmm.
yourself. So there comes a point, I think, where you need to look at yourself and what's going on for you. And that's not about blaming yourself or pointing the finger
Hmm.
at yourself. Just understand, what's the effect of this been?
Hmm.
Is this the first relationship like this that you've been in? Has it been, was it a big shock to you compared to how you were treated in, in healthier relationships? Or is this a pattern? Are you drawn? Is there something in you that's drawn? And what is that that's drawn to people who are perhaps very shiny and then
Shine. I
turn
like
and
the
go,
word.
yes, and it's really, it's very difficult, I think, to talk about, because I can't give simple answers.
You're right.
I can't sort of say, oh, this is the thing, this is what happens, because it's different for everyone.
Hmm.
This needs to involve some real self-reflection and
Hmm.
exploration. And then also, I think there's a need to learn or relearn healthier relationship skills,
Hmm.
you know, and I think, because if you've learned how to survive, even if you've been in a long relationship that's been very hurtful, disrespectful, and abusive, you'll have developed ways of being in relationship that are very, that, that are adaptive to that situation.
Right.
They're not adaptive to the new relationship. I can give you an example. I am rather clumsy, and
Okay.
and I often lose my keys
Oh God.
or forget. It's just, and I had a partner who was extremely critical of that, really
Oh
hostile,
no. Oh no.
really.
Okay.
And then I was in a new relationship, and this was a new relationship. It wasn't that new. It had been a long time,
Okay.
and I went out and I had a great night out. I had such a good night out. I messaged him and said, I'm not coming home until later. I'm having a
Was
great, it was
diplomatic.
just after the pandemic. It was my first night out after the pandemic. And I sent a message saying, we're having a great time. I don't think I'm going to come home early. Don't wait up. Just go to bed. And he messaged me back saying, no problem. Glad you're having a good time. Don't take offense. I will be asleep when you get home. I'm like, no worries. So I come home
Uh-huh.
and I'm on the train on the way home. And I'm like, I don't have my keys.
You don't have it.
And I'm like, oh no, I don't have my keys. And I'm there and I'm at my front door and I'm anxious and I'm bracing myself because I'm like, he's going to
Okay.
be so cross. He's going to be so angry. And I have to knock the door really loud. And he comes down. Clearly, I've woken him up. He opens the door
Uh-huh.
and I'm like, oh, I'm really, really, really sorry. And he's like, whatever. Good night, darling. Good morning.
Oh God.
And I'm, oh my gosh. And this wasn't like a narcissistic person. This wasn't like an abusive relationship.
It
But I'm
was
like,
just chill.
oh my God, I still carry that shame with me from the
Uh-huh.
past. And how much more heightened is that going to be for someone who's been in a very abusive relationship, someone who's, been consistently put down, who's been told their opinions are invalid, who's really questioning themselves and really questioning their self-esteem and their worth. You were going to bring that into future relationships.
Of course.
So it really does well for you to be aware of what's going on for you and to think about, how do you want to do that differently? How do you how can you change? And also not even necessarily doing anything differently, but just so you know, like you're on the train on the way home and you're like, oh, there's that pang of anxiety.
Oh no, yeah,
But I'm so critical now. So probably I owe him an apology and that's it.
right.
This
There's
isn't
quite
going to
a
be
bit to do.
a deal that
Mm-hmm.
gets cast up in the
Mm-hmm.
future.
I mean, we all do tend to like, sort of reenact our past relationships and our present ones. Um, but okay, I have a question. So, let's say, the person who is left that sort of toxic relationship is doing everything right, they're taking care of themselves, probably working out, meditating, doing whatever it is, the career is going well. Um, but let's say they do get into a new relationship, like you said, um, you sort of start, I wouldn't say missing in a bad way, but you know, uh, narcissistic relationships are pretty fiery, pretty passionate in the beginning.
Mm.
So I'm not, how do I put this?
No
You
chemistry.
sort of, when you're in a stable sort of space, you start missing that excitement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. There's no chemistry.
Uh-huh.
Right? That's what it
Oh,
feels like.
right,
And that,
right. Yeah.
but I think it's a really important issue because one of the things that, first of all,
Mm-hmm.
we all do this to some extent. We all idealize at the beginning of a romantic relationship,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's on best behavior. Your
Mm-hmm.
makeup's always done. The hair's
Uh-huh.
always nice.
Mm,
You always tidy up before they come round. You're always on kind of, you're in a good mood. You're pleased to see them. They're not
right.
seeing you on a bad day. They're not seeing you when you're tired. They're not seeing you when you're stressed out after work. Or if they
Mm-hmm.
are, they're the distraction. So, they're not having to, and you're not having to deal with them on their bad days.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's a normal part of dating. And it's normal to idealize someone at the beginning. And in some ways, there's actually research that's found that it's actually kind of good for the relationship if people rate the other person a little more positively than reality.
Oh,
You know,
okay. Yeah, I'm okay.
rose-tinted
That's the
glasses.
first time I heard that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's lots of research on this and in lasting relationships too, people who are in happier relationships tend to have a slightly rose-tinted perspective on their partner.
Oh, okay.
They overplay their strengths
Mm-hmm.
and they downplay their flaws a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So we all do that.
Mm-hmm.
But when so you need to kind of remember with people with narcissistic traits or NPD,
Uh-huh.
there's very often one of the diagnostic criteria is having fantasies of ideal love.
Mm-hmm.
So when they're approaching a new relationship, they're very idealistic.
Mm-hmm.
This is the love that's going to be different from all the other loves. This is
Mm-hmm.
the love that's going to be really, really special. It's going to be superior.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be so perfect. It's going to meet all my needs.
Mm-hmm.
This partner's going to, and that's what's going to make me feel good about myself, to have
Mm-hmm.
such an amazing partner who adores me
Mm-hmm.
and who is so perfect, who I adore. Okay, so kind of like pathological narcissism is very much, I think, for a defense against low self-esteem. It's a way to regulate self-esteem through superiority.
Mm-hmm.
The only way I can be acceptable is to be superior.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to have a superior relationship, and here's my new superior partner.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to have this ideal love. So it's very idealized.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's that very ordinary excitement and idealization at the start of any relationship, but it's turned up many, many, many degrees,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's kind of intoxicating.
Mm-hmm.
To have someone who's telling you how special you are, how different you are, how much they're wildly in love with you. This is why in these kind of relationships you get really early proposals. We should get married like tomorrow. you know? Or
Uh-huh.
of course we can have a baby. Let's have a baby and start the ideal family. We'll
Oh
make
no.
amazing, beautiful, clever, smart babies. You have this kind of speeding up of everything,
Hmm.
and that's intoxicating and it's exciting. Whereas the healthier person who's seeing you through rose-tinted glasses, they're not making a big declaration of love on
Hmm.
date one. They're not proposing on date three, suggesting you move in with them.
Hmm.
In it's a much slower process, and I think it's for someone who's particularly someone who's anxious. The narcissistic person will, they'll tell them everything they want to hear. And it's
Hmm.
not a deliberate act of manipulation most of the time. Sometimes it is. There are some people who will genuinely, like, I'm just going to manipulate this person.
Uh-huh.
But most people, the narcissistic person is just as caught up in the fantasy.
Hmm.
They both are. This is the person who's going to love me like I've never been loved before.
Hmm.
This is the one who's going to make me feel special. This is the one who's going to really attune to me.
Hmm.
And the narcissistic person feels great. I can be the hero,
Right.
save you. I can rescue you, and it can be
Uh-huh.
that too. This person can be my rescuer. This person can provide me with perfect care, or the other person's like, I will be the one who helps this person out of their narcissism.
Ah,
There's a grandiosity in that too.
right.
So I don't know if I'm making sense. But an
That
ordinary
makes total
relationship,
sense.
yeah, the ordinary relationship where the person is calm, steady, it's just not that intoxicating. It's just not that exciting. It's much more grounded in reality.
Hmm.
And you'll start to see their humanity much more quickly.
Hmm.
The narcissistic person is wanting to show you the grandiose side that they think you're going to fall in love with. They don't
Hmm.
want you to see the ugly bit. They don't want you to see the insecurities.
Hmm.
And it's interesting is as you get towards the insecurities that
Hmm.
all the defenses,
Hmm.
what you think of the narcissistic defenses, the anger, the aggression, the antagonism, the blaming, the gaslighting, it comes out because you've got close to the insecurity,
Hmm.
or you've seen something that's just not so perfect.
Perfect. Right. Ah, okay. That thank you. Thank you so much for that. I so okay. So a lot of people, I've seen this a lot of social media as well, but it's, it wasn't love, it was a trauma bond, that sort of a statement, to help people who are in narcissistic relationships, sort of break that black and white sort of thinking when it comes to their partner. But do you think, as a therapist, if it's sort of invalidating to the person who is not, who is the codependent person in the relationship, telling them that they were not in love, or the person that they were in love with was not real, or this was only a trauma bond and it was not love, does that make it worse instead of helpful?
Do these two things have to be incompatible?
Um, you mean,
Like you can, first of all, what people mean by trauma bond
mm-hmm,
can be different. Not everyone means the same thing when they say it. And the same with
okay,
love,
uh,
define love.
mhm,
Poets have tried for centuries.
right,
No, there isn't a definition.
uh-huh,
I think when you say, I think you're right that it can be dismissive
uh-huh,
to have as a trauma bond,
uh-huh,
love.
uh-huh,
Really leave someone feeling like they've been tricked.
uh-huh,
It can also be a very ungenerous and not very accurate picture of the other party. Like, well, they tricked you by traumatizing you so you couldn't leave them. It's reality is just more complicated than that. I
right,
mean, yes, I mean, there's a whole literature on domestic abuse that will talk about how, in an abusive relationship, you really lose your self-esteem.
mm-hmm,
You begin to feel very dependent on the other person. It erodes your autonomy, it erodes your ability to do things for yourself. So it makes it harder to leave
mm-hmm,
and be convinced, well, no one else could ever love me anyway.
mm-hmm,
So there is that kind of element that's a reality and that really needs to be explored. Um, But I also think people are complicated.
Hmm.
And very often, this person has had those very positive ideas about you, has seen you in a very positive light for a
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
It may have turned, it may have got very, very nasty. But I think when you can integrate both in your own mind and you can understand that both exist
Okay, that's more
and
helpful.
that it may have been, I don't want to say a delusion in the sense of it stemmed from, they've seen you and through the lens of their narcissism, and the lens of their narcissism has colored the way you see your relationship too.
Mm-hmm.
And so too the lens of your own insecurities,
Right.
you
True.
know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think kind of understanding all of that is probably harder. And there's
Mm-hmm.
no simple answer because it's different for everyone. You can't just slap a label on and say, this is the process that you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that's probably more fruitful and a lot more liberating for people than to be like, it was a trauma bond.
Right.
But I also did love him.
Uh-huh.
No, you didn't. It was a trauma bond. No, that's very invalidating for people.
Invalid. Okay. Okay, thank you. So you'd say integrate both of them. That's what you
Yeah,
say. Okay.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's also that there isn't one answer. There isn't like this is the way it is.
Uh-huh.
That there's such diversity of experience.
Right.
You know,
Uh-huh.
I
Okay.
can't do a one size fits all.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's different for everyone. So yeah. So I have one final question for you. But it's completely like just a personal opinion sort of a thing I'm gonna ask you. So, in a DSM-5, not the three, DSM-5, I was just one day I was just looking at, the like things required to, diagnose someone with NPD. Um, do you feel like it seems how do I put this? It feels like they're painting a Disney villain instead of trying to like things like lack of identity or things like that aren't really in the list of things, and it feels more like outward than inward, if that makes sense.
This is a you need to talk to Alan Francis about this.
Yeah.
It's very, you know,
Like, what
all
do
of
you
the
think about
diagnoses are based much more on what can be observed by
that?
someone else.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um, but I think you're right that actually the internal experience is more important to capture when
Mm-hmm.
you certainly when you're working with people. I prefer the alternative criteria that didn't get through. So they're
Oh,
published in the DSM and they
okay.
do talk more about the internal experience. I think they're more accurate,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't get through. But I guess the other thing I'd say is most of the time, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know that it's that helpful to make a diagnosis, especially of NPD, because there isn't a specific treatment for it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So for me, when I'm working with someone, I'm much less interested in what is the specifics of the disorder,
Mm-hmm.
or what's the label I put on the disorder, and also because, particularly the personality disorders, they're so comorbid.
Right.
You know, NPD can be someone who's also very high in psychopathy,
Mm-hmm.
who's engaging in criminal activity,
Right.
who should probably be in the criminal justice system, not in my office. That is a presentation of narcissistic personality disorder. And also to be really clear, I don't work with that population.
Right.
I have colleagues who do.
Okay.
Um, and I don't know how they do it. It's amazing work that they do, but I have to be, and they say to me, how do you work so constructively with narcissists? And like, well, because I'm not working with the narcissists who've committed major frauds,
Right.
who have killed somebody, who've
Uh,
committed serious crimes. I'm working with the narcissists who are emotionally volatile
uh-huh.
and have real difficulties in their interpersonal relationships.
Mhm.
Oh, I think someone else has joined.
Oh yeah.
um, and someone who is, oh, God, lost my train of thoughts. Yeah, but also I'm often working with someone who is struggling with those things, but also has some strengths. They're probably
Mhm.
quite successful in their, because I work in private practice.
Uh-huh.
They probably have jobs. They're probably quite successful in their work.
Mhm.
Um, they uh, they're probably functioning in other areas.
Mhm.
I work with a lot of people with narcissistic traits
Mhm.
who really struggle in their closest relationships, but not so much in their friendships and their business relationships
Mhm.
because they're just not close enough to
Uh-huh.
set off all of their defenses,
Right.
or because, they're getting enough admiration and respect. Nobody's seeing behind to the vulnerability that's there.
Mhm.
And I don't think, and the other thing is, I think sometimes I know people go like, well, you see, because they're masking and they're covering it up. And I'm like,
Oh
no,
no.
it's a very ungenerous way to see it. I just think it's not being triggered, but the person who's closest to them is
Mhm.
seeing something that other people are not seeing.
Seeing, that's it. Okay.
And I think and it's a bitter pill to swallow because sometimes people say, why is he so awful to me, but so
Uh-huh.
charming and nice to everyone else? I'm like, well, actually, because you're so special to him, because
Mm-hmm.
you're so close to him. Now, this is not an excuse, and
Of course.
it needs to be clear. It's not an excuse, and nor is it you're special to him, therefore you should stay. No,
Mm-hmm.
it's because you're special, because he actually cares. You get close to that vulnerability. He's getting more anxious of rejection. And that's provoking these big, big defenses.
Mm-hmm.
Should you stay? That's your decision.
Mm-hmm.
No? Probably not if the behaviors
Right.
are really hurtful to you,
Right.
right? But at the same time, it's not. I don't think it's fair or realistic to say, "Oh, well, then he's masking." That's the true face.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're all the true faces, and we all have those things. We all show up in different ways at different times.
True. True. We all mask up a little. I mean, mask up a little bit.
We have different sides of our personalities that come out in different contexts
Mm-hmm.
that are appropriate in different contexts.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm at a kid's birthday party, I'm rather different than how I would be in the therapy room,
Mm-hmm.
or how I would be if I was with a friend who was really upset about something,
True.
or a friend who was celebrating a big success. We all adjust to our situation and our environments.
Mm-hmm. So if you had the option, you'd probably would you say it's better if we sort of throw away these labels like masks and unmasking
I
and
think often they're used in such simplistic ways.
uh-huh.
They're helpful. They give you a language, they give you a way of understanding something, but
True.
I think it's best to hold to the frameworks a bit more lightly.
Uh-huh.
We're discussing phenomena that are complex
Mm-hmm.
and really variable. So, you find a way to talk about it, a way to explain it, but I think don't get too attached to the labels.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Makes sense. Um, Thank you. Oh, actually, wait, I'm so sorry. I do have one question because you just spoke about labels. So let's say someone who is, narcissistic, obviously, maybe they're suffering with a sense of lack of identity, right? Do you think weirdly giving them a diagnosis helps them connect with some identity? I don't know if that makes sense. Like NPD, like it's like you're giving them some sort of
My first thought is
identity.
that's not the identity I want to give them.
Yeah.
I will say something, and this will be controversial, so
Okay,
why not
we
say
love
it?
controversial opinions, yeah.
Why not?
Uh-huh.
That idea, oh, you have narcissistic personality disorder.
Uh-huh.
You are irredeemably evil and bad.
Uh-huh.
Nothing you can do about it. You cannot change.
Uh-huh.
It's one of the most narcissistic things someone could say about themselves.
Right.
Right? Because I'm a narcissist. I'm the biggest, baddest baddie. And not only am I the biggest, baddest baddie, I'm also the biggest, baddest victim, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Oh no.
Woe
Oh
is
God.
me.
Horrible.
I am the biggest victim of my own narcissism because I can't do and no one can ever love me. That's narcissism. That and it also is playing into a kind of narcissistic story.
Uh-huh.
I can't help it, I'm a narcissist. That is not any way to live, right? You know, and remember, there is a very strong association between a victim mentality and
Uh-huh.
seeing yourself as incapable of change and incapable of taking responsibility and
True.
pathological narcissism. Those two things go together. So I'm
True.
never going to say that to someone. And I'd much rather say, yes, you have. If you want to call it narcissistic, call it narcissistic.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have these tricky tendencies. You have developed these ways of coping.
Mm-hmm.
And they are ways of coping with dreadful circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you deserve the opportunity to develop something different.
True.
I think you deserve the opportunity to take better care of yourself. I think you deserve the opportunity to find ways of managing these defenses in so that you can actually enjoy your life and enjoy your relationships and so that you don't hurt the people around you.
Mm-hmm.
So none of what you went through is your fault.
Mm-hmm.
You can have responsibility, and that's the good news. There is responsibility and capacity in your hands to do things differently. You're not the victim of this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've said that to people,
Damn. Okay.
right?
Do they take that well?
It varies, right? Some people take that very well because they're like,
Oh.
okay, I can. There is
Uh-huh.
hope.
Mm-hmm.
I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
It may be difficult, but I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Others don't take it so well because it's like, but then I'm less hopeful because I'm like, well, the reaction to that is, well, I can't help it.
Right.
There's nothing I can do about it. You want to wallow in it?
That's such a yeah.
You know,
I think well, okay, yeah. Do you want to wallow in it? Is a pretty straightforward way to.
you
Okay.
want to stay there?
Oh,
You know,
oh,
so,
yeah,
but yeah, but I do think that story about narcissism is very serving of some people's narcissism.
yeah, it is. And it's obviously when you frame it that way, not helpful whatsoever.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah.
I know. Put that in a short. It'll go viral and we'll get lots of hate messages.
But no, I kind of agree with you. So I do agree with you. So I will be joining you in the hate club if anyone wants to hate on that. Um, anyways, I really want to thank you so much for being here today. And I cannot even begin to tell you how much I admire what you do. Thank you for doing what you do. And yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. And I love your channel.
Thank you. Thank
Yes,
you.
you've had some really good people on there.
Oh, thank you. Like you.
Like me, of course, but
Like
not just me. Just me.
right.
Oh,
Anyway, thank you. Okay. Take care.
all right.
Bye.